faked by the sound of violence.
What up, everybody, and welcome to episode 200 of the Sound of Violence podcast. We are an MMA podcast that talks about the MMA podcasts you should catch and not miss each week normally. However, for episode 200, we want to do a little bit something different. So I am Pulver. I'm here yet again with my co-host, Chris Madaffer. How's it going, man?
We made it.
That's right. This is episode 200. Which I think we're actually way more than that, since I don't number like all the weird stuff we do, like commentaries and all that shit. And then also, I think right around this week is our 5-year anniversary of doing this show, which is fucking insane. It does not feel like that long, but it was right around UFC 200 when we started posting everything on pretty much everywhere. So big milestone, and rather than make you guys listen to us talk like you have to all the fucking time, we wanted to kind of make this a celebration. So Chris and I bounced some ideas back and forth. Ed Gallo tried to talk us into doing a party on Zoom, which he ended up doing actually on the MMA pod, or the Fight Site MMA podcast, and those were hilarious. I recommend checking them out. But we really just wanted to kind of celebrate the MMA community and give back, and the best way I came up with to do that is I reached out to just about everybody who had their DMs open that I could find that we've talked about their podcasts. We got everybody from podcast hosts you'll definitely recognize. We have, so you guys heard the Chris Rini clip in the past, which I'm actually going to drop at the front of this, where we asked him the question that we asked everybody, which is, what's your favorite MMA podcast and why? And we got some fucking awesome answers. I'm just really happy with how all this turned out, and I'm absolutely hyped. Chris, you've seen, I think, about half of it so far, since I'm still in the process of editing, and it's pretty cool, right?
I like it a lot.
Yeah, we've got some very cool answers from a ton of different people all across the board in the MMA community, and I am very hyped. I think you guys are going to dig it. So, Chris, anything you want to shout out before we kick this motherfucker off?
No. Because I'm still trying to figure out what we're kicking off as far as just this whole thing's going. If I'm honest, true. I have no idea what we're doing.
Well, so essentially what's going to happen is we're playing all kinds of clips. I have these all cut up. I also have spliced in a clip in between each one of us cracking a beer from an episode.
I was curious about that. I was like, oh shit, I haven't seen that in a long time. Okay.
It's in sequential order of, mostly in sequential order of like just the episodes. I think our first video episode, actually I know it is, was episode 100, where you guys will see Trevor Price hanging out with us on the couch back in Santee, like forever ago. That was, 2 places ago for me, I think? So, pretty fucking wild.
I remember what fight that was, too, or at least the card. It was the John Jones versus Gustafsson, too.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was a hot minute ago. Yeah, it was end of 2018, I think, right?
Yeah,
something
I think
like that. Dude, absolutely wild. So I am hyped to get into this, and so like I said, there is I split it up with beer clips just because I didn't know how else to edit it, and I figured that was the best way. So if you guys want some good beer recommendations, those will be in there. And also the other thing I told people is a couple people when they responded, they're like, dude, I listen to some MMA podcasts, but not that many. So I always just ask people, like, give me a recommendation for whatever you like. Then, like, it doesn't have to be an MMA podcast. So there's definitely a range of stuff that'll come up, and I think you guys are gonna dig it. So, Chris, should we kick this thing off?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well then, in honor of episode 200, Chris and I have decided that the only way to start this thing is with the shotgun of a beer. It is the middle of the day, and very warm in both places.
Yeah,
we both have.
This is gonna fuck me up. Mostly because right now I'm on an empty stomach, and also I'm supposed to go. I live right by a community college where they have a massive like set of stairs. I'm supposed to go with my brother and my friend Blake in a second, but fuck it, this is a hell of a way to start that off. I haven't shotgunned a beer probably over 2 years. I'm not good at shotgunning.
I'm
good at chugging. I'm good
beers.
at chugging out of pints.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's way fucking easier. I haven't shotgunned a beer in a long time, so we'll see how this goes. But I am fucking hyped. We'll also see if it takes Chris 10 minutes to open his beer. Does the beer go all over Chris, or did he pay attention to the instructions before the show?
Oh no, I have it. I have it leveled, so there's no.
All right, I know. Yeah, see, you're good.
Went a little bit, but that's fine.
Well, hey, as long as you didn't spray your entire setup, I think we're good.
No, we're good. I just sprayed myself a little bit. I'd rather that than my nice laptop. So
There you go.
I have a fucking towel too. Hold on a second. Actually, yeah, that wasn't that bad. That was pretty minimal. All right.
Hell yeah, bro. You ready to kick this thing off?
You know
also, Chris is shotgunning a session IPA, so that's going to be fun.
Dude, this is going to be bad, mostly because I should have done it on the other side, because now I have to awkwardly open it like that.
And then tilt really fast? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, you ready?
Oh, man, that's going to be bad.
Count it down. 3, 2, 1. Oh, that was slow. That was really slow and cold.
Yeah. Dude. Session IPA. Oh, I think I have a drop left. Oh my god, dude, my stomach hurts so fucking bad.
Yeah, that was a terrible idea. All right, Chris is going to go run stairs. I'm going to go to work, and you guys should enjoy these clips. We love you. Thank you, everybody, for submitting stuff. Oh, if you didn't get your clip, please still send us the clip, and we'll play it on a future app. So, till then, yeah.
See ya.
Hello, my friends! Hey! Boom! And we are live. What up, everybody? It is episode 100 of the Sound of Violence podcast. If you guys don't know, normally we are an MMA podcast that talks about the MMA podcast you should catch, skip, and can't miss, as well as we try and talk about some new shows. And for our 100th episode, we're probably doing some video. Apologies, you gotta see this ugly mug and shit. So I'm Pulver. I'm here with my co-host, Chris Badaffer. What up, dude?
You can tell you are very much doing art that you want to see. And I feel like that's we started this show because I wanted a podcast that talked about all the MMA podcasts out there, and nobody was doing that. And I was like, well, I guess I have to do it then because I want it to be out there. So, that's very cool. And then I guess that segues in perfectly to my last question, which is we are actually in process of reaching out to a bunch of our favorite podcasts and asking them what their favorite MMA podcast is. The only rule is it can't be from the outlet you work at, because we are I'm a giant pain about bias, so I gotta ask you, what's like your favorite MMA podcast or one you wish more people would listen to?
Can I go top 5?
Please.
Co-main event podcast. Luke Thomas live chat.
Yeah.
Eugene S. Robinson.
The Show Stomper, you got to, yeah.
Knuckle Up and the Show Stomper.
Yeah, there you go, old school.
You know? And let me see, then, well, obviously I love listening to people in the industry talk.
Mm-hmm.
So Fernanda Praches, best camp of my life, has really been, scratching that itch. And then I think Heavy Hands. They're hilarious, and you still feel like you're learning.
Yep, absolutely. Honestly, you named the shows that end up consistently in our top 10 every year.
I mean, it's this, and shout out to like Jack Slack, Dan Tom. Guys are great.
Yeah. Also, R.I.P. to the Art Fight Podcast guys. I loved your episodes of that back in the day. If people want to go listen to those,
there was one called MMA Untethered.
Boy, that sounds familiar. I don't remember it off the top of my head. It
was the main people who, when I was listening to it, because they were around before me, was Patrick Wyman, Matt Roth, and oh my god, I'm totally blanking. I feel he ran the MMA Tournament of Bad. I'm gonna look him up right now. So I don't remember. So I don't.
Yeah. Oh man, does MMA podcasting miss Pat Wyman? I mean, to be fair, he's doing incredible work on the History podcast. But
yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. The MMA TOP, but he's they're all tapped out of MMA, and understandably so. I think they were like so deep in it, and it's a very unrewarding.
Yep, and honestly,
if you're as smart as Pat, just go find somebody who appreciates you.
Exactly, MMA never deserved Pat Wyman.
Matt Roth, I know he works in a brewery, and he's
awesome. Yeah, that's right.
And then
follow
MMA TOB. He's fucking got like a master's in statistics, he's just like PhD in statistics. I don't remember, but basically these guys are like, they don't need to get shit.
Yeah,
from the MMA community, you know. So I get it.
G'day TSAV. Guys, I just wanted to drop in and say g'day. Congrats on the 200 shows. Fantastic achievement. It takes a lot of dedication and perseverance to keep plugging away week in, week out. And me, for one, I respect that and appreciate the work you do. So thank you. So you're the podcast that reviews other podcasts. So what podcast do I listen to? I love everything from a wide range of spectrums that cover, you know, different aspects, from technical analysis of the sport to the financial business part of it, to just general banter, reviews, previews, opinions, and all of them give me like a sort of a balanced view of what's going on. Shout out to, you know, podcasts like Co-Main Event, Submission Radio, the Brit Pack, Bloody Elbow, Do Good Things, you know, Mocky and Crookie, John Morgan, MMA Roadshow, and all the Junkie crew actually, Dan Tom, Goes and George, and they've just, Bodylock crew, they've just signed Matt Wells. It's a good signing. So, but I enjoy the casual, laid-back reviews and podcasts that just like to have a drink and give their opinions and in a laid-back atmosphere. So shows like Bill Welker's MMA on the Rocks. He's got good takes every week and just in a casual, laid-back environment, which is great. Same thing for, you know, John Morgan and the MMA Roadshow. Casual banter, and they also bring a sense of actually being on the ground at the event during fight week, which is what I really enjoy when I can't be at the event myself. So, you know, just a bit of banter. Any show that enjoys a few beers and a few rums or bourbons is all right by me too, funnily enough. And what are we drinking today, you might ask? Well, we are enjoying a Sleep When You're Dead Black IPA. So make of that what you will, but it is going down a treat. So guys, thank you very much for the first 200, and here's to the next 200 shows, and keep up the great work and love what you do, and peace guys. Thank you.
What's up, y'all? This is Juice from the Friendly Sparring podcast, and my favorite MMA podcast is Best Camp of My Life, hosted by the incomparable Fernanda Praches. She is my favorite writer in the MMA media, and her former podcast, well, actually, was such a comfort in my life, and when it was gone, it left a void that was, you know, empty until she returned with Best Camp of My Life. Her takes are always refreshing. She gives a unique perspective that only she can give, having the experiences that she has had and the interviews and guests she does. It's just one of a kind. And I implore you all to check it out. And thank you so much to The Sound of Violence. The work you guys do, it does not go unnoticed. Much love to everybody.
So I was asked to record a clip about what is my favorite MMA podcast, and I had to take a moment to think about that. It wasn't that it's a hard answer, because the quick solution to me is Morning Combat with Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell, but I had to sit back and think about a lot of the ones that I do listen to. So if I had to go first and foremost, it would be Morning Combat. Obviously, Luke and Brian, I think, are two individuals who speak about a wide range of combat sports, not just sticking to MMA, but they also cover into boxing. Brian even tries to seep into pro wrestling a little bit, and pisses Luke off every single time. But those two, I think, are the best fit for what I like to hear when it comes to the world of combat sports. But some other individuals out there I just kind of want to throw out there. Fernanda Praches has a good show as well, and her previous show that she had on Spotify when she was a part of The Athletic was very good as well. who else do I like listening to? Kel Dansby and Andreas Hale. The Corner Podcast, I believe they have an excellent show. They talk about mixed martial arts, boxing. They talk about pro wrestling and a lot of culture stuff as well. So being an African American, an Afro-Latino, I should say, listening to their content is right up my alley because it gives me someone else to listen to who looks a lot like me. And that is something that's kind of still rare in MMA and combat sports media. But those are a couple that jumped out to me. And be sure to listen to as much as you possibly can because there are a lot of great voices out there covering the combat sports space.
What is going on, Sound of Violence podcast? It is I, Drake Riggs, host of Broadened, Horizin, the WMMA Today podcast, as well as Drake's Takes, here to celebrate the big 200th episode, you guys. So awesome to see. Love what you guys are doing with the show, and adding in my take on my favorite MMA podcast, which I had to think about this a lot, you guys, and unfortunately, I just cannot come to a single conclusion about what my favorite MMA podcast would be because I don't get that much time to sit down and consistently watch one or have found one that really I've stuck to. And I do check out your guys' show, of course, and hear all the great suggestions, but I just haven't found time to get around to one. But if I had to give a little bit of a cheat answer, just give me anything with James Lynch. James Lynch is the man, and always checking out his stuff. Not back-to-back dedicated to one show necessarily, but hey, give me a James Lynch podcast. I will definitely check that one out at some point. So congratulations again, you guys, on the big 200th episode. Thank you so much for the love and support that you've given me along this journey, and can't wait to see what else is in the future. Here's to 200 more, you guys. Congrats.
Hey guys, honored to be put into this group. Thanks for taking my submission. So my favorite podcast, right, is gotta be Show Money. I'm a business nerd. Obviously, I've got the Fight Business podcast, cover a lot of business topics in the sport. But, what really got me into MMA in a lot of ways was hearing Show Money. I had heard John Nash speak on the Luke Thomas show when I was first new to MMA. I loved that he was covering the business side of stuff, wanted to learn more. He's talking about a new Show Money episode that was coming out. I ended up watching it, and it's not the most polished show, right? You're not gonna have a lot of crazy special effects. It's just three dudes who are experts in their field talking about important stuff that a lot of people weren't covering, and now you've got them covering a whole bunch of stuff. They're blowing up. It's well deserved from the work they put in. But I love that podcast because it's one of the most informative podcasts that you can possibly listen to learn about the business side of MMA, legal side of MMA as well, and just incredible insight you can't find anywhere else. And it's just a good time. So Show Money for me all the way is my number one podcast.
Sound of Violence, congrats on the 200th episode. Ed Carbajal here from the Coast to Coast Combat Hour podcast. You guys asked what my favorite podcast, MMA podcast was. For me, it is Chael Sonnen's You're Welcome, or You're Welcome with Chael Sonnen. His podcast actually got me into podcasts in general and inspired me to, start the Coast to Coast Combat Hour that I do with Matt Hawkins. So that's my favorite podcast. You also asked for a beer recommendation. I like Belgian triples, quads, and sour-ish type beers with high ABV. So get yourself a few, get lit. Congrats. And I really do appreciate the love. I know you guys show us a lot of love over the years. Thank you so much, and hopefully this helps you guys out too. Thank you.
Hey, what's up, the Sound of Violence podcast? I'm Matthew Hawkins, co-host of the Coast to Coast Combat Hour. So when I'm not listening to content put out by my co-host Ed Carbajal, I'm listening to the Last Round podcast, a boxing podcast by Danny Zaldivar and Michael Shepard. Whether it's big-time interviews or just the general knowledge of the world of boxing, I like to get away from MMA a little bit and listen to what those guys got to say. Plus, being the West Coast side of the Coast to Coast Combat Hour, I always got to root for Team SoCal. So big thumbs up to the guys at the Last Round podcast, and a big thumbs up to you at the Sound of Violence podcast.
What's going on, guys? It's Lucas Grandsire here. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to Chris and Pulver on episode 200 of The Sound of Violence. Congratulations, boys. You did it, episode 200. Most people, they get to episode 5 and then they flame out, but you boys kept it going to 200. And I don't know how you do it, man. I don't know if I could listen to that many podcasts out going crazy. So I know everybody in the space appreciates everything you guys do. So in terms of my favorite podcasts in MMA, I'll be honest, I don't listen to that many podcasts, but I would probably have to say Morning Combat. That's a good one. I like the dynamic between Luke and Brian Campbell. The guy that's trying to be the goofball, the other guy that's no selling it. I really enjoyed them. But I'll be honest, I usually tune out to the, once we get to Have You Seen This Shit, that's kind of where I tune out because I don't really care about the funny videos. I have Derek Lewis's Instagram for that. And then, unfortunately, in my great taste, I also enjoy when Joe Rogan has an MMA person on his podcast. I just enjoy hearing someone that's used to doing boring interviews talk about DMT and chimpanzees ripping off people's appendages. So those would be the two for me. So thank you guys for including me in this, and congratulations again, episode 200. That's a big.
This is Sam from Southpaw, and I probably listen to over a dozen MMA podcasts, so it's hard to say which is my favorite. So what I'll do is give you the ones I've been listening to a lot lately and I think need some shine rather than just the usual suspects. So Protect Your Neck is a podcast I listen to a lot lately, not just because Dan Tom has great analysis, but also because he's growing as a person and he's very transparent about it on his podcast. There's also the Come On Now podcast with Trent Reinsmith. Trent does a lot of good fact reporting and broad analysis of the goings on with the UFC. And the other podcast I've enjoyed is WMM Addict on YouTube. The channel focuses just on women's MMA, and the host has a perspective that's very much needed in the discourse.
Hey, what's up? It's your friend, Ed Gallo from the Fight Site, also Bloody Elbow, I guess. I don't know. Which one do people know me for? For this podcast, definitely the Fight Site. Do wrestling for MMA. I do a bunch of other random crap. But yeah, let's talk about other people. My favorite podcast that is not from my own outlet is the Protect Your Neck podcast, hosted by Dan Tom. Now, this is cheating a little bit because Dan Tom has worked with our outlet a bunch of times, but it was unpaid. So you see, that actually makes him not officially part of the site, and I can talk about his podcast. But Dan is probably the best analyst that's been around for the longest. He should have seniority. He should be listed all the time among analysts that are really good. You're probably going to get a lot of like Jack Slack and heavy hands on this. Dan's been doing it just as long as they have, and honestly, I think his standard of quality is a lot higher. I think he's just a very consistently excellent analyst, and that alone should be reason enough to listen. But he's also just like the best guy. Really amazing, and great personality, very funny, very sweet. And he just knows his stuff, and he's got a beautiful voice, and there's really no reason not to listen to Dan Tom's podcast. He also does this top 5 show. That's excellent. That's like how me and Dan became friends. I came on a show and I did that, and that's even more fun than the regular podcast. So he also knows his stuff when it comes to betting, and that's something I don't provide for sure, and I haven't heard the other analysts really get into that much. So he does it all. He does it all. Deserves the world. So love you, Dan Tom. Everyone go listen to his podcast. Happy 200 episodes, by the way, guys. It's freaking sweet.
First of all, congratulations on reaching episode 200. It's a massive accomplishment, and I'm really, really happy for you. You produce some great content yourself, so I would highly recommend anybody listen to your podcast. That's first. Secondly, I only get to pick one podcast, so no disrespect to any of the, dozens of other fantastic podcasts out there that I would definitely recommend people listen to, but I only get to name one, and it's going to be the OG for me. It's going to be the Heavy Hands podcast. I started listening to them years and years ago at this point, back when it was Connor and Pat. I wasn't even that deep into it, meaning, I became a fan when they weren't so deep into their episode count. I think still in the double digits, so been a fan for a really long time. Always will remember the Cesar Ferreira versus Elias Theodoro argument between Pat and Connor. Used to love it when they get into those little tiffs. And when Phil took over, I was a little bit upset. I was like, no, I don't like change. But Phil turned out to be amazing. So the level of detail, the technical analysis, how well their personalities mesh, when they insult each other, their cold openings, everything about the podcast is genuinely enjoyable to listen to. Outside of the Fight Site Podcast Network, they are absolutely my personal favorite MMA podcast to listen to, and I would recommend them to anybody. There are others that I would recommend, but if I only get to choose one, it's got to be the one that got me much deeper into analysis. So Heavy Hands Podcast is definitely the one that I would choose.
I'm Ryan Wagner from the Fight Site, and The Sound of Violence is my favorite podcast on the Citadel. So I was asked to give a list of my top 5 favorite MMA podcasts, but I do not listen to MMA podcasts, not even those of my colleagues, so instead I'm going to give you guys a list of my top 5 Muay Thai fights. My number 5 is Dieselnoy Chorthanasukarn versus Samart Peyakarun. For those of you not familiar with Muay Thai, if you ask people who the greatest Muay Thai fighter of all time is, they'll usually name either Dieselnoy or Samart. This wasn't a super competitive fight, but it's probably one of the greatest performances we've ever seen in Muay Thai from Dieselnoy. Definitely the greatest clinch performance in Muay Thai history, at least that there's film available of. So if you enjoy clinching, guys getting kneed in the face and the body, definitely check this fight out. Number 4 is Johnson and Fairtex versus Sakmonkol Sitchuchok number 5. These guys fought a bunch of times. I don't know if the 5th one was their last one, but it was definitely their funnest. It's called the elbow fight for reasons that you can probably ascertain. It's an insane brawl. Both guys go to war with elbows. If you've seen Uriah Faber breaking his hand against Mike Brown and then only throwing elbows, it's basically that, but for like 10 minutes. It's insane, super fun, super crazy. Definitely check that one out. Number 3 is Lamnamun Sorasumali versus Gensak Sorplanchet. These guys fought several times. I think there's film available of 3 of their fights on YouTube. All of them are very worth watching. Lamnamun Sorasumali is one of the better clinchers in Muay Thai, and their fights are Lamnamun trying to swarm Gensak in the clinch, while Gensak does a lot of really slick counter clinching. Both are super fun. Really shows how an effective outfighter can both compete in the clinch with a clinch master and shut down their clinch entries. All 3 of their fights are super high paced and very fun. Definitely a must watch series. Number 2 is Chamwakpet Hapalong versus Ole Kiatanawe. Chamwakpet is one of the most famous, well-known aggressive pressure fighters in Muay Thai. He's just an insane swarmer, just tracks guys down, forces them to the ropes, and just goes to town on their body and head. Ole Kiatanawe is one of the slickest outfighters in Muay Thai, so it's basically this crazy rampaging destroyer against a super slick outside fighter. 2 of their fights are available on YouTube, but their first one is probably the best. Both fights are super high paced, both guys are doing a lot of damage. Most of the fight is Chamwakpet trying to figure out how to swarm Ole, get him on the ropes, and tee off on him, while Ole does a lot of his slick outside footwork and counterpunching. And their first fight has a super exciting ending that I won't spoil here. For number 1, my all-time favorite Muay Thai fight is Wong Chinoy Sorpalanchai versus Cherry Sorvanich. Wong Chinoy is famous for being one of the hardest punchers in Muay Thai. He famously knocked out Nam Kwon in 33 seconds. Cherry Sorvanich is a strong kicker and a quite good all-around fighter. They fought 2 or 3 times. Only 2 of their fights are available on YouTube, and one of them is a quick knockout from Wong Chinoy. So the one I'm talking about is the longer one. The reason this is my favorite Muay Thai fight is mostly because of the momentum shifts and the adjustments they make. So Wong Chinoy comes out on fire, pressuring Cherry really hard from the get-go, backing him to the ropes, teeing off with hard punches, and then Cherry quite quickly adjusts and responds by pressuring Wong Chinoy in return with kicks. So they're both kind of fighting for dominance, trying to push the other back and really being aggressive. And once Cherry starts having success with his kicking game and he's able to push Wong Chinoy back and kind of diffuse his pressure boxing, Wong Chinoy then adjusts and starts entering the clinch. And then it kind of turns into a clinch war for the later rounds. Super exciting, really high paced, and both guys, it's really cool to see both guys continually adjust to try and enforce their game, and it really shows off the dynamic range that Golden Age Muay Thai fighters have in their skill set. Both guys, you can see, are very good at everything, and they're employing a very full skill set in the fight. Just amazing to watch.
Hey, this is Iggy of the Fight Site. Sup, Pulver, sup, Chris. And it is my understanding that this is going to be the anniversary podcast, the anniversary of the Sound of Violence podcast, the 200th episode, and I've been asked to provide some recommendations for the stuff that I listen to and enjoy in general. And the thing is, ever since I've started working for the Fight Site, I've actually stopped listening to most other MMA podcasts and MMA, following MMA outlets in general, because I kind of, if I do, it's only after the fact, after I actually express my thoughts on my own podcast and on the MMA podcast as well. But to just sort of, avoid diluting my own analysis and just kind of avoid subconsciously stealing other people's takes. I'm sure that those who do the same for a living would understand. But either way, Pulver told me that it's really unnecessary to just kind of stick to MMA only and just mention stuff I generally like and enjoy watching and listening to. So I guess this is what I'm going to do now. Either way, to get the MMA stuff out of the way really quickly and the combat sports stuff in general, I really enjoyed. I really kind of learned to do analysis by listening to Heavy Hands and Jack Slag, and I was a patron supporter of I think both of them. Well, at least Jack Slag. I was a patron supporter of Jack Slag at least, and listened to his historical episodes about old-timey boxing and all that stuff. And what else? I've also been a huge fan of Protect Your Neck, hosted by Dan Tom, and that's I think that's pretty much it. The rest is just the articles and the stuff produced by the current Fight Site team, which was previously the MMA soccer team, and stuff like Ryan Wagner's articles, Ed Gallo's articles, Riram's articles, and the full package. As to the stuff I enjoy consuming right now is. I would say I've always been a big Red Letter Media fan, the movie critics. Consistently great production value and consistently interesting and funny discussions, even when I disagree with them on grounds of, well, because since this is movies, it's all very subjective, but because they are the Red Letter Media crew are filmmakers, they always provide some fascinating insight that I always find very interesting, even if I do not necessarily agree with their criticism of any given movie. Moving along, I'm a big fan of Gamers Nexus and their methodology when it comes to testing components, testing PC components, and if you want to learn more about how. I've sort of used their videos to learn more about computers in general, and I used their video guides to build my own computer, and their stuff has been tremendously helpful. And I'm trying to sort of implement more and more of their philosophy when it comes to evaluating fighters. And you would say, well, the computers and fighters, like, where's the connection? But the general principle that they employ, it's just rock solid analysis methodology, and just their work ethic and the thoroughness with which they try and evaluate the different components they get is very similar to how I personally try to evaluate fighters and fighting in general, and just kind of, and their coverage of the industry as well, and just kind of very transparent, very thorough, very upfront about biases, and very, just trying to cover all my bases, that kind of stuff. Brian Limond, I'm also a big fan of his. Limmy, he used to have his own show on BBC, and now he's a professional streamer. His Scottish comedian, and it has this really weird sort of like surreal but also really grounded style of humor that appeals to me very much. Consistently, just constantly funny. Even the stuff that he says is just off the cuff and isn't very funny in his own words. It's always nonetheless extremely hilarious. Right, so, and also Forgotten Weapons, the YouTube channel. If you have an interest in firearms and firearms history, just I'd say it's an essential an essential follow, an essential source. In case you haven't noticed, I'm recording this when I'm really hungover. I've got completely demolished yesterday, just passed out in front of my computer, and it's also not my first language. So if my wonky pronunciations and misspellings and all that stuff is annoying, then I guess just too bad. Sylvie von Douglas E2 and her stuff on Muay Thai. I'd say if you're a fan of Muay Thai and you wanna learn more about Muay Thai, it's an essential. Per patron is an essential subscription if you want consistent quality content on Muay Thai and learning more about Muay Thai history. I also really enjoy watching PBS videos, mostly PBS Eons and PBS Spacetime, as well as now that we are talking about scientific content, I also really enjoy Kurzgesagt and Anton Petrov's stuff. His channel is literally just called Anton Petrov. Atlas Pro is also a good one. Just a really good geography channel. Covers topics like climate change and the different phases through which Earth has different stages of Earth's development over the millions of years. Really fascinating stuff. Benji Thomas Paleontology channel, really very interesting, as well as just kind of the same stuff that PBS Eons does. And Anton Petrov is kind of like adjacent to PBS Spacetime in that they both cover physics a lot of the time and cosmology. That's good. What's interesting? Arthur Isaac, a futurist and I think an amateur physicist, sort of a citizen scientist and science communicator. His channel is also really interesting. It kind of has to do with general kind of myth-busting, the general sci-fi tropes that are frequently found in sci-fi media, and just kind of trying to come up with scenarios for future development and stuff like interstellar travel and interstellar colonization from a point of view of modern physics, as they are understood by the scientific community today, without kind of sort of falling back on things like, I don't know, magic particles making your ships go faster than light. He kind of tries to discount that and just kind of come up with plausible but nonetheless very fantastical and very interesting scenarios for future development. I'm also a big fan of video games, and I used to be a video game blogger and a video game reviewer, amateur one, but nonetheless, it was still a big interest of mine. And I really enjoyed Matthew Matos's videos and the way he approached analysis and analyzing games and just kind of breaking them down from a gameplay perspective, from a narrative perspective, from a mechanics perspective. Just very thorough, very, I'd say, measured and nuanced approach to evaluating games, and not the stuff that you generally kind of see in other channels that are like, it's shit, 9 out of 10, IGN.
he really avoids doing that stuff. So would highly recommend Matthew Matosis. And quick combat sports mention before this just goes out of control and I start talking about everything that I like. There's just too much of it. I just kind of I have an enormous library of stuff that I can recommend, but since this is already 10 minutes, I presume other guys are also going to record their own clips, and I don't want to clog up the podcast. Lee Wiley, boxing analyst and current boxing coach at I forget the name of the group that he coaches with. But anyway, he moved into coaching, and as a result, fighters like Josh Taylor are now utilizing really like classic boxing, vintage boxing techniques, like stuff like infighting and just creating space to punch in those gray areas. That's a skill that's currently seldom seen in modern boxing. And if you study his, I would especially recommend his Tower of Roberto Duran series, which studies Duran's infighting and boxing ability in depth. Just essential viewing if you want to understand how the most high level boxers, how all-time great boxers utilize their skill, utilize like really tiny, really hard to notice techniques to beat up fighters who may be on their level at first glance, but those tiny things, those are the things that separate all-time great competitors from just quote unquote immensely talented and masterful fighters. All right, I suppose that's enough of that. Once again, don't want to clog up the air time. So this has been Iggy of the Fight Site. Hope you find my recommendations interesting. Hope you check them out. And once again, cheers, Pulver. Cheers, Chris. And have a good one.
Hey guys, Bill Welker from MMA on the Rocks here to say congratulations, Chris and Pulver, on 200 episodes of The Sound of Violence. You guys have been doing the dirty work the past few years, listening to all the MMA content out there so that we don't have to. And I always appreciate all the nice things you guys have had to say about MMA on the Rocks. I always feel honored to be mentioned with the likes of some of the greatest MMA podcasts out there. And the question you guys had for me is, what is my favorite MMA podcast? And that kind of depends. I could break it down into a few different categories, but my number one go-to has always been You're Welcome with Chael Sonnen. I just feel like he's really underrated as an analyst, and he has some really unique perspectives on a lot of things going on in the MMA world that a lot of people don't talk about. As long as you know how to kind of filter through his shenanigans, let's say. But I'll also say I enjoy the Keyboard Warriors. If you're talking about post-fight recaps, those guys know how to do it and have a good time. And if I'm looking for a really detailed pre-fight breakdown, it's got to be Protect Your Neck with Dan Tom. So that's it. That's what I like. I appreciate it again, guys. Thanks for reaching out. Congratulations again on 200 episodes. Cheers.
Hey, Kevin, our friends over at the Sound of Violence
This
podcast.
is the sound of violence.
That's right. That's the lesser known stained version of the song. But yes, our friends over there have asked us to tell them what our favorite MMA podcast or show is. There's one catch, though.
Yours?
We can't say our own. Otherwise, I would have said Verbal Tap, and you would have said The Grappling Hour, and
What's yours?
Well, mine is obviously Paul Moran, friend of the show, long time. He hosted Open Mat Radio. I thought it was one of the best shows out there. They did really good interviews, really good range of guests, and unfortunately Paul's not with us anymore, but his spirit is very much still reflected in the many, God, so many podcasts that are in the jiu-jitsu community. But Kev, what do you got?
As is his voice. And for me, it's The Shoot by Juan Carlo and Gabe Gambino. The Shoot Rap is a combat and comedy podcast hosted by Juan Carlo and Gabe Gambino.
Okay, can I ask a question here? You're kind of reading it like Oprah. Are you just reading copy of the show?
No, this is from the heart. They talk about MMA news, rumors, events, and
Kev,
much more.
Hold on. Kev, are you literally just fulfilling a bet that you had with one G-Baby, the host of The Shoot? You lost at Over Under Kevin, and now you're just reading on somebody else's show when they asked us a very sincere thing to do for them?
That's ridiculous. But the first segment up with G-Baby talk is Robert Drysdale. So you tell me.
Well, I think that'll do it from us. Thanks to the gents over at The Sound of Violence. Keep up the okay work.
Favorite name I've ever heard.
It's not bad.
Sound of Violence.
It's an overall tough, though.
Hello, this is Fernanda Prates, host of Best Camp of My Life on Fanbyte. I don't know if I was required to introduce myself here on this clip, but I figured everybody could always use a new take of me saying my own name. My favorite MMA podcast is probably one that will come up here a lot, I'm guessing, and it is the co-main event hosted by Ben Folks and Chad Dundas. I'm just such a big fan of them. Granted, I am a little biased because I have worked with both Ben and Chad, and I know they're amazing people, but I truly do love their show. I think it is just the right balance between information and opinion. It's also got a lot of humor because they're both just naturally and I think effortlessly funny guys. They have been working together for a long time, and it really does show on their product because everything just flows. It all feels like very seamless, and they manage to pack in so much in a show that isn't that long. I feel like 1 hour, 15 minutes is really just that sweet spot, and they manage to just get a lot of information in there. So if I don't have time to listen to a lot of podcasts that week, they're a really good bet because they're just a good bang for your buck. And yes, I'm still working on my evil plan to knock one of them out of their own podcast so I can, swoop in, but please don't tell anybody that.
What's up, TSOV? It's Matthew Wells here. And since you're twisting my arm to choose one podcast that I listen to regularly, out of all the great ones that are out there, I'm going to go with my man Dan Tom and his Protect Your Neck podcast. That's one that's been consistently at the top of my list for many years now. I love the way he breaks down fights. I love his top 5 list, so he gives you a couple of different angles to go with there. And it's just an easy listen. You just put it on, go about your day while you're doing your stuff, and you get some great information from one of the best minds in the sport. So, like I said, that's the one that I would go with since you're twisting my arm. I feel a little bit bad because I'm leaving out so many other great podcasts that I listen to, but hey, it is what it is. You made me pick one, made me jump off the fence because I am a habitual fence rider, but that's the one I'll go with. Shout out to my man Dan Tom, fellow coworker at MMA Junkie.
What up, everybody? Quick addendum for this next clip. So one of the people I reached out to is John Nash. I was super hyped to get a response from him. However, I'm the worst and I word things terribly. And so I believe here I got the actual clip of what I sent, just to be fair. I reached out saying we're reaching out to MMA podcast hosts we've discussed to ask them for a minute or so clip of what their favorite podcast is and why. And John Nash, going above and beyond, but in a different way, he actually cut 2 clips, which, first off, respect. That shit takes time, and that shit's just time consuming, and it's not fun or easy to do. So hyped that he did it, but I don't have audio from him. I just have just the motorcycle going by. I just have the text he sent me, so I'll throw it up on screen, but I figured I would read it too before I play his clips. So he said he uploaded 2 files, and I'm going to play both since, dude, you spend the time to cut it. I'm hyped to hear him. He says he figured somebody would have already picked CME or Morning Combat, which been hearing a lot of both of those. So glad he came with a different one. And he said the first clip is going to be the Fight Business podcast. Quote is, "I like it because it's one of the only MMA podcasts that look at the business side of MMA on a regular basis, and the host, Pat Auger, offers knowledgeable, insightful observations." The second is Jason Nason's Punch-Out, which I've not heard of before at all, and I'm hyped to check it out. Let's see. He said usually he covers pro wrestling, but when he does cover MMA, it's almost always interesting discussion. One of the best, probably the most underrated interviewer in the space. And so I'm very hyped to hear both these clips. So let's go ahead and run these clips from John Nash. First is going to be a clip of Pat Auger on the Fight Business podcast, and second is going to be a clip of Jason Nason's Punch-Out. So cheers, enjoy.
So there was a particularly popular tweet that got picked up by some journalists as well as a lot of MMA Twitter, talking about the reported pay-per-view buys being in the neighborhood of 500,000 buys, and Usman getting a salary of 1.6 million when you calculated his base plus the amount he would get per buy. And a couple of news sites also reported on that. They took the info, the original source info coming from MMAsalaries.com, and ran with that, wrote up several pieces about it, said, yes, 500K buys, all of that. Now, look, I predicted 500K pay-per-view buys a while back. Really just one show now. Sorry. It's been ages down here in Texas. So I predicted 500K buys. I would love for that number to be true, but you can't trust these numbers at all. These are the type of numbers that are just blatantly wrong. And how do I know that? If you look at MMAsalaries.com and you go look at UFC 257, right? Or any other of their pay-per-view numbers for that matter. UFC 257, they have 2 million buys. Now, Sports Business Journal and several reputable sites that I do trust to probably be in the correct ballpark at least, reported 1.6 million pay-per-view buys for UFC 257. So that's a 400K, just completely wrong. There's no source on them. I've never heard of MMAsalaries.com before this happened and all these reports came out from a couple of other smaller sites taking that number and running with it. There's no real reason to believe these guys. It's pure conjecture. There's no evidence. There's no citing any real sources. They say it's an estimate based on previous salaries and all of that.
I mean, he's a pay-per-view guy, but I don't know. I guess it really depends on what his level is, of if he really does want to come back, whether he's willing to fight the Tony Fergusons or the Dan Hookers or those big enough names for him. If not, how's he expect to get back to the top? There's so many questions about, with his next fight, if he has a loss, what does that do to his drawing power? Does he care at that point? His legacy. I'm fascinated by the McGregor story of this, because his next move arguably could be the most important one for the rest of his fighting career.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I think his legacy is set to a certain extent. I think he will always be a former two-division champion who's an incredibly compelling guy on camera and in the octagon. But my question is why? Like, why would you want to go back and fight your way through the wilderness again? And you're just sort of inviting yourself to suffer more head trauma that will possibly decrease the quality of your life later on. Now, that's my perspective, but I'm not a fighter. So these things in the fight industry, typically play out in a particular way for the reasons that fighters are fighters, and they want to compete. They have a hard time hanging things up. They have a hard time accepting setbacks, and they try to battle back and get back to where they were previously.
What up? It's your man Ant Walker, here to talk about my favorite podcast now. I definitely have to say what I enjoy listening to is always going to be something that takes you a little bit deeper. Yeah, it's cool to have an event recap, but you got to dive deeper than that. It's cool to talk about some of the issues, but you got to dive deeper than that and get into the larger implications for the sport. That's what really gets my fires going. That's what I really enjoy listening to. That's what I enjoy doing myself. So
I mean, definitely would have to mention like co-main event podcasts. I think Ben Folks and Chad Dunn is doing an incredible job. Anything Luke Thomas does, fantastic as well, because they consistently dive deeper. But let's send some love in a different direction here. Shout out to G, Mike, Jasanga, and Kairos for Shots Fired and the WOCast. I think those people consistently bring grade A content and give a new wrinkle to the discourse. Their contributions to the larger discussions are quite underrated, and it's about time they get some love. So shout out to them. Shots Fired and the WOCast, my favorite podcast.
Hey boys, congratulations on the 200th podcast. Everyone knows I'm a big fan, and I'm coming on here today to tell you what my favourite MMA podcast is. And it's probably The Sound of Violence, to be honest, these days, but that'd be a bit of a cop-out, so I can't give that answer. And I suppose, like me, like a lot of people in MMA media today, got into it via listening to podcasts or liking different journalists and stuff like that, and kind of, me especially, kind of fell into it an awful lot. And there were some really great inspirations for me, like my own Severe MMA podcast. When we started that podcast, my look for that podcast was to be like the Co-Main Event podcast. I was a big fan of Ben Folks and Chad Dundas, and I feel like two people sitting there talking to each other, discussing the fights, agreeing and disagreeing, whatever it might be, talking about that week before was a big inspiration for me. Ariel Hawani has always been a big inspiration, just how good he is at interviewing and stuff like that. Even though I didn't do as many interviews as other people down through the years, I feel like the way he does it, how calm and cool he is, and the amount of knowledge he knows was always a huge thing for me to look at. But the one person I really took even the most inspiration from, and you know, the question is, what's your favorite MMA podcast? Well, my favorite MMA podcast is anyone Crooklyn is on, and that's the answer. She's been on lots of different podcasts down through the years, and to me, as someone who is sitting here, you know, at home producing my own podcast with my own microphone, my own camera, my own light here blinding me and everything like that, I looked at someone like Crooklyn who was able to do it by herself. You know, she was able to produce that podcast, present the podcast, interview people, discuss fights, break everything down, give her picks, do writing, do everything. And to me, and you know, without a big production team, without a big studio and everything like that, and I thought that was very, very good from day one, always. And the amount of content she was able to produce, the quality of content she was able to produce was inspiring to me, and I think a lot of people as well. So my favorite podcast is not a podcast, it's a podcaster. It's Stephanie Haynes Crooklyn. Everyone knows her, and if you don't know her, you should know her, because she's absolutely fantastic. And she's the one who inspired me. She was the first one to ever ask me on a podcast. She told me that the one bit of advice she gave me was, keep talking, don't stop talking. And we're here about 10 years later and I still haven't stopped talking. So any chance I get to compliment Steffi Haynes, I will do that. And without a shout out, without all of our podcasts down through the years have been my favourite.
Alright lads, Carl McLaughlin here, formerly The Fight Site, infrequent guest on Heavy Hands. Picking my favourite MMA podcast is a little bit difficult because as a former staff member for Bloody Elbow and The Fight Site, those are off limits, probably amongst the podcasts I listen to most in terms of MMA. So instead, I'll go for Jack Slack's podcast, formerly Fights Gone By. And to be perfectly frank with you, I never used to be a big fan of his, but I've come around to him in recent years and listen to his podcast whenever they drop. I can listen to him talk about fighting technique all day. And this is probably a call for people who don't think they're a fan of Jack Slack to give him another try, because if I can come round and listen to his podcast every week, then maybe you will too. Another podcast I listen to frequently in terms of MMA is this one, The Sound of Violence. And I think using the week's MMA podcast as a launch pad to talk about all the topics of the week, both big and small, in terms of fighting, in terms of the business of MMA, is a great idea. And I love it, the fact it's just two guys talking, shooting the shit, and it's like we're allowed to sit in the room and be friends with you guys. And I think the atmosphere is what makes it so good, as well as the content. And this is why you hit this milestone. Congratulations on it. Here's to many more. Thanks for your support, and I'll keep supporting you guys. Cheers.
All right, favorite, huh? You guys want to know my favorite one, huh? Was that one with Jenna Jameson where they're all on the boat? Right. Wait. So favorite podcast can't be a podcast. Shit. Okay. Well, I guess I can't choose your guys's, but Chris Pulver, Sound of Violence at TSOV Pod, and all the generates associated. I do got to wish you guys a happy 200 because that's what this is for, right? As my dog joins me here, Brownie. Maybe she wants to wish you a 200 too. You want to say 200? Huh? Bit my arm off almost over here. Okay, all right, off. She says happy 200 as well. It's hard to do in the podcast space and then MMA podcast space. And you guys, your voices, Chris Pulver, much less together in the podcast, much less the ones you give shine to, my dumbass excluded. It's really awesome, man. It's a fun time to hang out, and I'm happy you guys have gotten to 200. I hope 200 and many more than 200, to be perfectly honest. But I know it's hard to cover MMA in no matter what capacity, even for fun in the podcast form, right? So that's going to lead into my number one. I do want to give an honorable shout to other different and awesome voices like, Best Camp of My Life, Fernando Prates. Also shout out to Rod Del Campo. But my vote's actually going to go to Southpaw Podcast. And basically, because MMA's been harder to cover and there's just so much that goes with it. And I myself has always been a fan of history, but especially been on a history kick lately. Southpaw Podcast has been right up my alley. Whether it's history on Cuba, feminism and women issues, and how they tie in with the martial arts scene, culture, history, and relevantly, historically, etc. I love it. They'll bring in analysts like Jason Sargis to talk fights, and it's just it's much needed voices, and it has nothing to do with them being Sam Yang and company being, fellow Asians in media, which is, we obviously lack representation on pretty much all fronts that doesn't even matter because they represent and cover so many issues, as it should be. They keep that same energy, which I love. And so they're going to get my vote for my current favorite podcast, Southpaw Podcast. Congratulations on 200, guys. Cheers.
Hey everybody, it's TJ DeSantis. If you don't know me, I think you're probably not that hardcore of an MMA podcast nerd. I mean, I don't want to sound cocky or anything, but I still think I've produced more MMA podcasts than anybody. 1,500 beatdowns, 500 Savage Dog shows, I think 500 Jordan Breen shows, 499 episodes of It's Time with Bruce Buffer, something like 200 episodes of the John Anik and Kenny Florian podcast. I don't know how many story times with Uncle Creepies I've done, all of them, but I don't know what the number is. Did a bunch of Morning Wood shows with Dee's Nuts. That's Tyron Woodley and Dean Thomas. This doesn't even include the Sherdog Radio Network Roundtables, MMA Sunday School, the very short-lived Stephen Quadro show. What else did I do in the MMA scheme? Between Rounds Radio, Collapsed MMA with myself and Jordan Breen. I don't know. There's probably a lot that I'm missing. The point is, I've done a lot of these things, and I'm still doing a bunch of them. Please check out Extra Rounds from UFC Fight Pass, available wherever you get podcasts, or in video form on Fight Pass, or the Fight Pass Facebook, or Twitch, or I don't know. Just listen or watch. See, that's the problem. I started doing radio. Never really liked the word podcast. Thought that podcast sounded like it was an amateur thing, and I come from the FM world. And really, I'm just being snobby because a podcast, like, what is radio? Oh, we're going off the rails here. I do this from time to time. Just go with me. What is radio? Radio is the way that we listen to most traditional mainstream terrestrial audio broadcasts. You listen on the AM or FM dial. We call it the radio because the radio is the instrument that brings it to us. But really, the way that I listen to my favorite radio show, which is a terrestrial radio show, I listen on podcast. So you can arguably say that it's a podcast, and that's what everyone does now. And again, like my podcast, it's more a video show now, and I hate it. I don't like to be seen on video. But my belief, and I call a lot of fights, is like calling fights for Invicta Fighting Championship. It's really radio at the end of the day. I just have to be on camera for 3 minutes at the beginning, and I hate every single second of those 180 seconds that you see my big dumb face. But that's not why I'm here. One thing that I'm here to talk about is my favorite MMA podcast. And when the Science of Violence, the Sound of Violence. See, I'm bad. I'm sorry. I don't listen to MMA podcasts. I do appreciate what you guys do, though, being a podcast about MMA podcasts. I love the industry of I just realized I did a podcast called The Science of Violence with Mike Fridley and Gary Randall. See, this is how many of these things that I've done. But The Sound of Violence asked me to name my favorite MMA podcast, and apart from the ones that I have produced, I don't really listen to any. It's not for like a higher purpose of like, I don't think anybody's as good as me. No, it's just a simple fact that like I produce MMA and combat sports related podcasts all day, every day, essentially, that I listen to things like This American Life and Freakonomics Radio. And In the Dark, my favorite podcast of all time, season 2 of In the Dark is amazing. Go listen to it. Has nothing to do about fighting, though. Fighting the system, more like it, but I digress. I would like to say that if you had to put a gun to my head and say, hey, pick your favorite MMA podcast or MMA podcast that you respect, I believe I was 3rd or 4th to the party with my show called MMA Evolution, which was on InsideFighting.com. But before me, I think you need to pay respect to No Holds Barred with Eddie Goldman, which was on the IATA radio network. And then, of course, Ryan Bennett, the late Ryan Bennett. Without Ryan, I would have never done MMA radio. I mean, I probably wouldn't have ever done MMA radio. I was working in FM radio at the time I started my MMA radio show, and literally did so because I liked what Ryan was doing. And I actually reached out to Ryan, who did Sound Off Radio over at MMAweekly.com and actually created some production elements. As you can tell, I used some production elements to start this weird random segment. There's a talk bed underneath me. I love radio imaging. That's what it's called, radio imaging, or imaging, maybe podcast imaging, for all I know at this point. But if I weren't doing what I do in the MMA combat sports space, I believe that I would be creating imaging for radio stations throughout the world. And I wanted to bring that element to Ryan's podcast. And for a variety of reasons, he never used it, mainly because I don't think he had the kind of technology required to play some of the stuff that I was giving him while talking over it or while using a phone call, etc. I have some of those old drops somewhere. I got to find them. They're on CDR somewhere. I don't even own a CD player, so I don't even know where my CDs are. But if I ever find them, maybe I'll share them with you. But yeah, so Ryan, Eddie Goldman, Nick Kalikas did Pro Karate Weekly right around the time that I started MMA Evolution with my friend Caleb Quinn. And then, I jumped over to Sherdog in December of 2005, launched the Sherdog Radio Network. And right alongside of what I was doing at Sherdog, Gorgeous George was doing Tag Radio along with Goes and Frank Trigg. And that obviously went into MMA Junkie Radio, and MMA Junkie Radio is still a thing. And the Sherdog Radio Network is definitely not a thing. We kind of play with it sometimes over at Between Rounds. If you want to waste some money and get access to an archive, $10 a month, we do some new stuff, but I'd appreciate you checking it out at patreon.com/Between Rounds. I don't suggest you do it because I probably won't live up to my end of the bargain, but I have a loyal community of about 100 people that stay in touch, and it's a fun Discord at the very least. But yeah, I don't know, man. I'm rambling here. I wanted to get this to you guys because you asked for it, and I'm late with it. I'm sorry. But yeah, this is something that is very meaningful to me. Like the space of podcasts and MMA podcasts as a whole, despite me not necessarily paying attention to the other people that are doing what I'm doing, I still honestly hope everyone the most amount of success possible, because for me, I was an FM radio guy who thought it would be fun to do a radio show about mixed martial arts, and ultimately it's been a career that my broadcaster career has been 22 years and counting. And let's see here, 2004, May of 17 of those years have been covering mixed martial arts, and I get to work for amazing events doing live play-by-play, which is really my newfound passion, for Invicta Fighting Championships or the Eddie Bravo Invitational. I've worked with Icon Fighting Federation in the past. I've done a Quintet Ultra where Strikeforce versus Pride versus the WEC versus the UFC. That's not how the order it was, but the fact is I got to call that event, and it was amazing, and it was all really done because of this snowball that started with A, radio, but B, podcasting. And man, I've lived dreams. And whether or not you've listened to me in the past, it's people like you that are why I'm able to do what I do for a living. And the fact that you guys do a show about shows, it's pretty unbelievable. It's a testament to the space. It's a testament to the fan base. And it's also a testament to technology because, again, I was third or fourth. I have no idea how many MMA podcasts there are. I know I've done a lot of them, but the fact that anybody can do it and sort of the cream can rise to the top, it's pretty special. And the fact that a podcast can sustain itself covering MMA podcasts is pretty special as well. So hopefully this wasn't too self-promoty, but yeah, I don't know. It's pretty cool, pretty special. I appreciate you asking my thoughts and impressions on the space. And yeah, so if I had to pick my favorite MMA junkie, because they've been going as long as anyone, longer really, when you think about it. So that's that.
All right, and with that, it is officially a wrap. I want to thank everybody so much for contributing. It really does mean the world to us. And honestly, just thank you to all the podcast hosts out there in general and all the MMA podcasts. I mean, we literally wouldn't be able to do the show without you guys, and the space wouldn't be nearly as interesting without you guys in it. So thank you to everybody for joining. And yeah, it's just been a blast. And our whole goal was just to spread some love to the MMA podcast community. And I think this episode's going to do a lot of that. So cheers, everybody. And happy episode 200. Here's to another 200. Oh, that was cold. Cheers. Oh, one more thing. If you guys are still here for this long, maybe wait a minute or two more. Maybe I got something for you. Cheers.
Liked by the sound of violence.
Disclaimer, this show is not a drinking game. So keep that in mind. That being said, if it were a drinking game, the rules would go something like this. When I
Open a beer.
You drink. The first person to see
An MMA reference.
like this one gets to make someone else drink. And when
Someone says the word podcast.
it's a social. Get it? But again, it's not a drinking game, so disregard all that.